Anthony's voice describing the moment his family's company, CEO, his uncle, called him begging for help after years of mockery and rejection. Stark contrast between past ridicule and present desperation. The same people who laughed me out of the boardroom were now on their knees. I was always the odd one out in my family. While the Romero name stood for tradition, stability, and old-fashioned business sense, I was the nephew who couldn't stop talking about algorithms and automation. My father's brother, Uncle Richard, ran Romero Manufacturing like his father before him, with an iron fist and a ledger book that might as well have been carved in stone. Growing up, I spent summers on the factory floor, watching workers assemble industrial equipment the same way they had for 40 years. Even as a teenager, I could see the inefficiencies, the wasted potential. While my cousins learned about inventory management from dusty binders, I was teaching myself to code, dreaming about how sensors and software could transform everything. "Anthony, you've got your head in the clouds again," Uncle Richard would say, placing his heavy hand on my shoulder during family dinners. This family built its fortune on steel and sweat, not silicon. The table would erupt in knowing laughter. My father, always the peacemaker, always in his brother's shadow, would smile weakly and change the subject. After college, armed with my engineering degree and boundless optimism, I came back home determined to modernize Romero Manufacturing. I spent 3 months developing a comprehensive digital transformation plan, supply chain automation, predictive maintenance systems, customer relationship platforms, pouring my heart and soul into every slide of my presentation. The boardroom that day felt suffocating. 8 pairs of eyes, all family, all skeptical, stared back at me as I walked them through my vision. 10 minutes in, Uncle Richard stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This isn't a tech incubator, Anthony. It's a business that feeds 37 families in this town." His voice boomed across the table. "We don't need your Silicon Valley fantasies here." I kept my composure until my cousin Marcus snickered from the corner. Something in me snapped. "You're going to be obsolete in 5 years if you don't adapt," I shot back, my voice rising. "Your competitors are already implementing half these solutions." Uncle Richard's face turned scarlet. He crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed his fist on the table inches from my laptop. "You disrespectful little—" The vein in his forehead pulsed dangerously. "You think 3 months of research makes you smarter than 3 generations of business experience?" The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table, at my father's downcast eyes, at my cousin's smug expressions, and realized I was truly alone. That night, I packed up my apartment and drained my savings account. If my family wouldn't let me revolutionize their business, I'd build something of my own. SupplySync was born in a tiny rented office with peeling wallpaper and spotty internet. My vision: creating an integrated platform that could predict supply chain disruptions before they happened. For 2 years, I worked 18-hour days, subsisting on ramen and determination. Every Sunday dinner became an exercise in humiliation. "How's the little app coming along?" Uncle Richard would ask, between bites of my mother's pot roast. "Found any actual customers yet?" My cousins would smirk into their wine glasses. Even my father started introducing me as his son, who was trying his hand at a startup thing. The worst came at my grandmother's 70th birthday. Uncle Richard had just secured a major contract with Stellar Tech Industries. Ironically, to help modernize their ordering system, the very thing I had proposed for our family business. As everyone toasted his success, he put his arm around me. "Maybe when you're done playing entrepreneur," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "we can find you a real position in the company. Something entry-level to start, of course." I smiled tightly, excused myself, and cried in my car for 30 minutes before driving home. Little did they know, Supply Sync had just closed its seed funding round. Little did they know, I was about to revolutionize the very industry they thought I knew nothing about. And little did they know how desperately they would need me when their world started falling apart. Supply Sync was gaining traction faster than I'd anticipated. Our predictive algorithm had caught the attention of several mid-sized manufacturers who were tired of supply chain surprises eating into their profits. We weren't profitable yet, but we were growing, a fact I tried to subtly highlight at family gatherings, only to be met with dismissive nods or outright skepticism. "Yeah, impressive website," my cousin Marcus said at Thanksgiving, scrolling through Supply Sync's customer testimonials with a smirk. "Very colorful." "Those are actual clients," I replied, the familiar heat rising in my chest. "We've reduced their inventory costs by an average of 22%. Uncle Richard laughed from the head of the table. 22% of what? Two-man operations? Boutique workshops? He carved the turkey with theatrical precision. "Real manufacturing happens at scale, Anthony. You're playing with toys." My father placed a restraining hand on my arm, sensing my impending outburst. But I'd had enough. 2 years of condescension had worn my patience paper thin. "Those toys are the future," I said, standing abruptly. "And your refusal to see it is going to bury Romero Manufacturing." The table fell silent. Uncle Richard set down his carving knife with deliberate slowness. "You've always had a flair for drama," he said coldly, "but don't pretend to understand what keeps our lights on." "I understand innovation," I fired back. "Something that died at Romero the day Grandpa handed you the keys." Uncle Richard stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. In 3 strides, he was in my face, his breath hot with anger and expensive bourbon. "Get out," he hissed. "You're not welcome at this table if you can't respect what we've built." My mother gasped. My father half rose from his seat. "Richard, please." But my uncle wasn't finished. "In fact," he continued, jabbing a finger into my chest, "I've been meaning to tell you. We're partnering with Logitech for our supply chain modernization. Signed the contract last week. A real company with a real track record." The betrayal felt like ice water in my veins. Logitech was Supply Sync's largest competitor, a bloated corporate entity charging triple our rates for half the functionality. And worse, I had specifically pitched our services to Uncle Richard just a month earlier, offering a family discount that would have saved Romero Manufacturing millions. "You did this to spite me," I said quietly. Uncle Richard's face twisted into something ugly. "I did this because business isn't a game for amateurs." Something snapped inside me. My open palm connected with his face before I could think. A slap that echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Gasps erupted around the table. My aunt screamed. Uncle Richard staggered back, his hand flying to his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with shock and rage. My father was between us in an instant. "Anthony, what have you done?" I stood there, my hand still tingling, tears blurring my vision. "What he's been doing to me for years," I whispered. Then I walked out, ignoring my mother's pleas to come back. That was the last time I spoke to any of them for 6 months. I poured my rage into Supply Sync, working around the clock, pushing my small team to their limits. We landed 3 major clients, then 5, then 12. Our algorithm predicted the semiconductor shortage 2 months before it hit the mainstream news, allowing our clients to stockpile critical components while companies like Romero Manufacturing were caught flat-footed. I watched from afar as Logitech's implementation at Romero failed spectacularly. Their system crashed during the initial data migration, losing 3 weeks of order information. Then came the global shipping container shortage, which their software failed to anticipate, leaving Romero with components stranded in ports across 3 continents. Through industry contacts, I heard rumors of layoffs, of emergency board meetings, of Uncle Richard looking haggard and desperate at trade shows. Part of me ached for the workers, people I'd known since childhood who didn't deserve to suffer for my uncle's stubborn pride. Another part, the part still bruised from years of mockery and that final betrayal, thought, good. Then came news that Stellar Tech, Romero's biggest client, was threatening to cancel their contract due to repeated delivery delays. If that happened, the company my grandfather had built from nothing would collapse within months. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself they deserved it. I repeated these things like mantras as I fell asleep in my empty apartment, surrounded by takeout containers and success that somehow felt hollow. Then my phone rang at 3:42 a.m. "Anthony, we need you. The company won't survive without your system." Uncle Richard's broken voice hung in the air of my darkened bedroom. I sat motionless, processing his words, my body electric with conflicting emotions. "You've got Logitech," I finally said, my voice carefully neutral. "I thought amateurs weren't welcome in real business." A long pause. I could hear him breathing, the heavy, defeated breathing of a man whose pride was being strangled by desperation. "Logitech failed us. Their system, ... He hesitated. "Their system can't do what you showed us, what you built." I closed my eyes, savoring the moment I'd fantasized about for months. "And Stellar Tech is threatening to walk. How did you—" "I still have friends in the industry, Uncle Richard. People who respect what I've built." The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I could push him off it with a word. Let the great Richard Romero and his precious company plummet. Let my cousins learn what unemployment feels like. Let my father see what backing the wrong brother had cost him. But then I thought of Maria in accounting, who'd snuck me candy when I visited as a child. Of old Pete on the assembly line, who'd taught me to solder. Of 37 families who would be collateral damage in this war between Romeros. "The Northeastern Distribution Center is completely locked down," Uncle Richard continued, his voice hollow. "We have shipments from 6 suppliers stranded because the receiving software won't communicate with our inventory management system. Stellar Tech has given us 2 weeks to resolve the delays." I got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Success is the best revenge, they say. But what kind of success? What kind of revenge? "I can't solve this over the phone," I said finally. "I know." He sounded older than I'd ever heard him. "The board is meeting tomorrow at 9. Emergency session. I need you there." The pleas remained unspoken, but I heard it anyway. "I'll be there," I said. "But Uncle Richard?" "Yes? I'm not coming as your nephew. I'm coming as the CEO of Supply Sync. And this isn't a family favor. It's a business proposal." The next morning, I arrived at Romero Manufacturing 30 minutes early, dressed in my best suit. The building looked smaller somehow, less imposing than in my memories. The receptionist knew she didn't recognize me, directed me to the executive conference room where the board was assembling. I paused outside the door, straightening my tie. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about transformation, theirs and mine. Whatever happened in that room would define not just Romero Manufacturing's future, but the kind of man I wanted to be. I pushed open the door to find 12 sets of eyes turning toward me. My father half rose from his seat, his face a mixture of hope and uncertainty. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, and at the head of the table sat Uncle Richard. Dark circles under his eyes, the beginning of gray in his hair that hadn't been there at Thanksgiving. "Anthony," he said, nodding stiffly, "thank you for coming." I set my laptop on the table and looked around at the faces of my family, the people who had dismissed my dreams, mocked my ambitions, and now needed the very thing they had ridiculed. Let's talk about how Supply Sync is going to save Romero Manufacturing, I said, opening my presentation, and what that partnership is going to cost you. The tension in the boardroom was thick enough to cut with a knife as I walked them through Supply Sync's capabilities. My cousins shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. My father couldn't meet my eyes. Only Uncle Richard stared directly at me, his expression unreadable as I explained how our system had predicted the very supply chain crisis currently strangling Romero Manufacturing. We can implement within 7 days, I concluded, closing my laptop with a definitive click. Stellar Tech will have their shipments on time. But there are conditions. Uncle Richard leaned forward. Name them. Supply Sync gets a 3-year contract at full market rate. No family discount. I stood, placing both hands on the table. I want a 30% ownership stake in Romero Manufacturing. And I want a seat on this board. The room erupted. My cousin Marcus jumped to his feet. "This is extortion," he shouted, his face flushed. "He's using our crisis to steal part of the company." Uncle Richard raised a hand, silencing him. "Is that all?" he asked me quietly. I looked him directly in the eyes. "One more thing, you owe me an apology. Not in private. Here. Now, in front of everyone who watched you humiliate me." The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, that his pride would be the final nail in Romero Manufacturing's coffin. Then, something shifted in his expression. The hardness in his eyes softened, replaced by something I'd never seen there before. Respect. Slowly, Uncle Richard stood. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "I was wrong about you, Anthony. Wrong about your vision. Wrong to dismiss you." He glanced around the table. "We were all wrong." He extended his hand across the table. "I'm sorry. Truly." I took his hand, feeling the calluses of a man who'd worked his way up from the factory floor. For the first time in years, the bitterness inside me began to dissolve. The integration was grueling but successful. I practically lived at Romero for 2 weeks, working alongside employees who remembered me as the weird tech kid who used to roam the halls. Supply Sync's algorithm untangled the logistical nightmare, predicting shipment delays, rerouting critical components, and saving the Stellar Tech contract with 3 days to spare. Word spread through the industry. New clients called both companies. The partnership that began in crisis evolved into something neither of us had imagined, a complete reinvention of what Romero Manufacturing could be. 6 months later, I stood with Uncle Richard on the factory floor, now dotted with the sensors and automation systems I'd dreamed about for years. Workers who had feared losing their jobs were being trained for higher-skilled positions, maintaining the new technology. "You know what your grandfather used to say?" Uncle Richard asked, watching a robotic arm delicately assemble components that once required painstaking manual labor. "What's that?" "The next generation should build something better than we did." He turned to me. I forgot that somewhere along the way, got too comfortable with what we'd already built. At the next family dinner, I sat at the table without tension for the first time in years. My father's eyes shone with pride as Uncle Richard raised a toast to Supply Sync's latest industry award. My cousins asked genuine questions about my work. My mother squeezed my hand under the table. Late that night, as the family lingered over coffee and dessert, Uncle Richard pulled me aside. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "when I retire next year, the board will need a new CEO." I looked at him in surprise. "You want me to find candidates?" A rare smile crossed his face. "I want you to be the candidate, Anthony. You've earned it." As I drove home that night, I thought about revenge. How deeply I'd craved it. How sweet I'd imagined it would be. But this victory, this reconciliation, tasted infinitely better. I hadn't just proven myself right. I'd transformed the very institution that had rejected me. I hadn't destroyed my uncle's legacy. I'd become part of it while creating my own. The next morning, I called the team together at Supply Sync's offices. No longer a tiny rental, but a full floor in a downtown high-rise. We're expanding again, I announced. But this time, we're not just adding clients. We're redefining what family business means in the digital age. Success wasn't about making those who doubted you suffer. It was about building something so undeniably brilliant that they couldn't help but see the truth. The real revenge wasn't in watching them fail. It was in being essential to their success. Sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is to help them be right in a new way. Sometimes the best way to honor your vision is to bring along even those who mocked it. And sometimes, just sometimes, the family that pushes you away the hardest is the one that needs you the most.